Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard. Welcome back to Kaiser Watch, John.
Jim, pleasure to be back.
John, Joe Biden stated this week that the U.S. would intervene if China attacked Taiwan. Is this the third time he has ignored the policy of strategic ambiguity? Is it time to take Biden seriously?
Jim, I think it is. He made that latest comment while in Japan for a meeting with the so-called Quad Coalition, which consists of Japan, Australia, India, and the United States, to talk about security in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, at the same time, several nuclear-capable Russian and Chinese bombers buzzed the Sea of Japan to show China's disapproval. Now, the U.S. officials keep sweeping these comments by Biden under the carpet, saying, oh, he doesn't really mean that. And it is true that the United States has not moved away from its position of one China, which prevents it from recognizing China as an independent nation. But with Russia invading Ukraine, catching the United States by surprise, that has sort of changed everything. Now America is basically at the mercy of Russia with its threat of unleashing nuclear holocaust if it attempts to do anything to seriously assist Ukraine from being taken over by Russia. So they're looking at the Taiwan-China situation. They're looking at the trap Xi Jinping has created for himself with the zero COVID policy. He has to be confirmed for a third term in the National Congress this November. I don't think you can contain Omicron. I think this will continue to destabilize the supply chains in China. It'll really create a pressure cooker. And should COVID manage to escape his efforts to control it and show the world that autocratic measures are better than democratic measures, he will be in serious trouble. So it's such an obvious potential nationalistic distraction to just go in there and annex China, get it over with. The United States has already seen that China's acceptance of one country, two systems for Hong Kong means nothing. Hong Kong is now basically another part of China under the same autocratic grip as the rest of it. So he's signaling if you actually make a physical invasion against Taiwan's will, we will intervene. And he's trying to buy time. He's up for re-election in November 2024. That's 2.5 years from now. Taiwan is very sensitive because much of the world's semiconductor manufacturing capacity is based in Taiwan. If China does a invasion by force of Taiwan, the United States, no matter what its response, ends up losing access to this semiconductor capacity. So he is in essence warning Xi Jinping is just back off, maintain the status quo. We're not going to recognize Taiwan, but if you try to annex them by force, we have no choice. And what's interesting, I was reading an article in the Financial Times this week that in the first quarter reports for U.S. companies, there has been an almost across-the-board increase in CapEx spending by companies. And this is an unusual development because in the first quarter, the economic growth stalled. And with the, raging inflation and the raising of interest rates, it's clear that some sort of economic slowdown and recession is on the horizon. And what's happening is that the companies are starting to adapt to the reality that globalization is over. This is the week of the Davos Forum, and one of the big topics there is the end of 3 decades of globalization. It's ironic, these elites who became elites as a result of offshoring production into low-cost jurisdictions such as China are now scratching their heads how they're going to deal with deglobalization. Well, a lot of the smaller companies are already doing this. It's happening, but you don't build a chip factory overnight. It takes several years of activity. And what Biden is really doing is he's buying time, several years of time. And even if he loses the House and Senate to the Republicans this November during the midterms, he still has executive orders that he can deploy in order to preserve the United States' standing. And there's another thing that's got them quite concerned. We've heard about the Solomon Islands deal that China did, a security pact that allows it to come and assist the Solomon Islands in the style that Russia can come and assist Belarus. That creates a potential beachhead on the fringes of Australia, because Solomon Islands is part of that whole Papua New Guinea string of islands. Now there's talk about the Kiribati Islands, a group of tiny islands 2,000 kilometers south of Hawaii, that they're now worried about. And then there's a news report that there's a leaked document. A set of them was sent to 10 of these Pacific Island nations, and it's full of all kinds of goodies that they will offer, like scholarships in China, but also all kinds of terms such as sharing of information. None of these things are in the interest of the United States, and this week the United States also attempted to revive a version of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was originally created as a bulwark between Pacific trading nations and China, on which Trump pulled the plug as soon as he was in power. So this is a very serious issue now of trying to contain China, prevent it from expanding its footprint over into the Pacific, and to buy America enough time to allow this reshoring, nearshoring, onshoring process, that industry, that capital is now accepted. All of this, of course, means higher prices. It means lower profits, but it is an adaptation cycle. And all of this is good news for the resource juniors, because the metal supply, it's dispersed around the world, some of it coming from places that are going to end up off limits. So looking for this resiliency and redundancy in metal supply coming from jurisdictions closer to home, from small to medium-sized deposits. This is the new coming thing. Even though we're looking at a rough period for the economy in general and equity markets in general, we could see a secular bull cycle for resource juniors while all this unfolds. That was the theme of my talk at the Metals Investor Forum conference a week ago. The title was Preparing for the Return of the Physical. It's now available on YouTube, and you can get the link from my website if you want to see that 30-minute overview of what this changing nature of the world means for the resource juniors.
What's the purpose behind the delineation drilling program FPX Nickel just announced for the Van Zone on its Decar project in British Columbia?
The Van target was confirmed as a new awarenite mineralized nickel deposit similar to the Baptiste zone last year. Now, they published a PEA for the Baptiste zone in late 2020, and they're now working on a pre-feasibility study. They hope to have that ready by the third quarter of next year. But the issue that's come up is that the Van deposit is potentially bigger and or richer than the Baptiste project. So they're going back there with an 8 to 10 hole program. They'll march to the western part that they didn't get to, where there is outcrop, and they'll also march south where there is thin overburden, where they can also tell from geophysics where this target exists. And what they learned this year will give them a rough idea of the distribution of the nickel grade. Now, for the Baptiste project, the nickel grade in Davis tube recovery terms ranges from 0.1% to 0.14% through the 35 years of this 120,000 ton per day mine. They mine the highest grade in the first few years, but by year 5, it's already dropped 20% to 0.11%. So the question for FPX Nickel is, if they can show that the Van project can run 0.14%, which is what early results from last year indicate this is capable of, it would make sense if this can be done for the first 5 or 6, 7 years. That has a profound effect on the payback cycle and the internal rate of return for a large, expensive, multi-billion-dollar project such as what is proposed for the Decar project. Now, the drawback for this is the company hopes, on the basis of a PFS for the Baptiste scenario, to file an environmental assessment application either late 2023 or early 2024 to kick off the permitting cycle. And based on their understanding of that permitting cycle in British Columbia, that could result in production being possible by 2030. So they're pushing now with this van because they need to know by September next year, will van really qualify for being the zone that we mine first? And that would delay the filing of the environmental assessment project description by a couple of years. Now, whether the production happens in 2030 or 2032, if you're looking at that time scale, it doesn't really matter. Around 2030 is when projections indicate that the electric vehicle market will take off exponentially as the mass market starts to adopt them. And the problem with the drilling this year, which they'll have to follow up next year with more definition drilling, that the van zone is higher grade and large enough to substitute for Baptiste in the early years and make a difference to the robust economics of developing the Decar project. That would delay the environmental assessment project description filing by a couple of years. But by 2030 to 2032, that 2-year difference on that time scale really doesn't matter very much now. From an investor point of view, the possibility that the pre-feasibility study might end up being delayed to accommodate the substitute for the van, well, that might seem kind of a negative development right now, but the economics will be better. But what the company is also working on right now is the ability to make a nickel sulfate from the ferronickel concentrate. Right now, the PEA and the planned PFS, it's all based on the ferronickel product that will be produced, sold into the stainless steel market. The idea of making nickel sulfate out of this ferronickel product, this is still being studied by the company. And apparently by July, they will have finished a scoping study on a hydrometallurgical facility that takes the ferronickel concentrate and produces battery-grade nickel sulfate. And what's interesting is these nickel companies that have these advanced projects in jurisdictions where the source can be certified. This has now caught the attention of the car makers. In January, Tesla did a deal with Talon on its Tamarack nickel deposit in Minnesota, whereby it managed to get an agreement to have Talon sell the mine output at LME prices to Tesla. And Tesla didn't give anything in between. And everybody looked at this and said, this is a bad deal for Talon. And it's probably a bad deal for Tesla because if Talon has problems along the way and hasn't been helped out at all by Tesla, it just won't happen. So now we're starting to see that the car makers are thinking, we need to get involved upstream. And their numbers that they're calculating for their nickel needs in 2030 to 32, they are substantial. And they have this problem that the big nickel mining companies, they now see themselves as some sort of sunset entity. They're not in a hurry to push new product into the pipeline. They're certainly not interested in doing certifiably clean deals. They're just happy to smelt their product, put it into the LME warehouses and have the stainless steel market buy it from there. They don't want to do these strange custom deals where their output is specifically earmarked for the car battery market where it has to have all these ESG standards. They're happy to just go through the motions of putting new mines into production, not really being serious about it, letting the supply deficit grow, catching the growing margin, paying it out as dividends. So the car makers have woken up to this problem, and they are talking to the likes of FPX Nickel. And so one of the things that we hope to see in the next while, the stocks all got trounced starting in mid-April when finally the resource juniors got caught in the general equity market downturn. FPX Nickel was at 80, 81 cents. It even managed to trade below 50 cents. It started to recover as the market realizes there is going to be a secular bull cycle for these resource juniors. And FPX Nickel, if you just ignore all the nickel sulfate battery potential, the stock should be trading at $2.5 ahead of a future $5 to $10 buyout based on not even the current nickel prices, which are much higher than the base case price of $7.75. So FPX Nickel, everything's going well in terms of its news flow. It has not gone well with the market. However, this is a window where as the car makers start to understand that they're going to need to pitch in down the road, make investments, and they're not going to want to do it quite yet at this stage where FPX Nickel is now, but by sometime next year when they will need more money to take it to the next level and continue the showdown with the majors who are happy to just stand in the distance and take no action buying out these large deposits like Decar, they will be able to get financing at much better prices than today. So this is a window for retail, high net worth, and for institutional investors to recognize the meaning of the story and participate in the market. And we'll know in July to what extent nickel sulfate is an option. And I'm talking to Martin Torren. It's possible that they might even earmark all of the ferronickel production from the 120,000 tons per day to the nickel sulfate market, but it isn't necessary. That would expand the potential upside significantly for a play like this.
Verde Agritech announced a plan to redomicile from the United Kingdom to Singapore. What's that all about?
Well, I guess I should start by answering the question as to why this junior listed on a Canadian exchange with all its operations in Brazil, but is a UK company in the first place. And so this requires a bit of a backstory. Chris Velosa, the CEO, he is a Brazilian who studied law in Brazil, and he became interested in international business law. During the 2000s, he contemplated pursuing a deal in Germany or the UK. He had learned English as a child and studied German later on, but the UK ended up winning because they granted a scholarship for him to do a master's degree level program in the UK. So that's where he ended up in the 2000s. And while he was doing his master's studies, he ended up having to research the AIM listing system of the London Stock Exchange. And the AIM deals with resource listings, international resource listings. And he had never really heard of the concept of exploration companies. He was familiar with the big giant mining companies because Brazil's, got major iron mines. But this was something new. And as he got his head around and discovered that even in Brazil there were all these projects, some of these people he was hanging out with said, why don't you form a company, go to Brazil, collect a bunch of projects, and go public? So, of course, he did that, incorporated a company in the UK, acquired a bunch of projects in Brazil. And when it came time to go public, they said, well, AIM isn't really the best place to go public. You should go to Canada. So he trots off to Toronto, where he ends up managing in late 2007 to raise $16 million through an IPO at $1.20 led by Cormark. And the company at the time was called Amazon Mining Holding. And one of its flagship projects was the Madeira conglomerate gold play. And that was in the upper reaches of the Amazon basin. And I think it was kind of a silly of Chris to name his company Amazon Mining, because today we know that Amazon mining is something of a third rail for environmentalists, and ironically, a potential significant source of conventional potash is from the Brazil Potash Corp, which has a vaporite deposit in the middle of the Amazon basin, which they are trying to get the rules changed to allow its development. And of course, the environmentalists are all up in arms because they're concerned as to what's going to happen with all this salty water that will be a byproduct of mining Saskatchewan-style evaporite beds. But anyways, by 2008, the market had crashed. The stock was a thin trader. And by November 2008, the stock was at a 10 cents, well below its cash breakup value. And Chris Veloso had begun to question, why am I interested in this gold stuff? Now, he comes from a family that has deep roots in the agricultural sector. And somehow, during 2008, which was a very strange year when phosphate and potash prices literally went to the moon, potash, which had been stuck at $100 forever, it had gone to $1,000. And he became aware of the Verde slate deposits in Minas Gerais state, which had been found decades ago and investigated as a potential alternative source of potash for Brazil, which imports over 90% of its potash needs. And this is a glauconite, a mineral called glauconite, which is a silicate. And so the potassium is the K2O is not as easy liberated as it is in the sylvite, which is the basis for potassium chloride, and that's a salt. So the government has invented something called thermopotash, which was simply heating the ground up material in a rotary kiln, which resulted in a product where if you added it to soil, the potassium was gradually released for crop uptake. And Chris's idea was, well, we've got potash now in the $500 to $1,000 range. In the 1980s, at $100 a ton. The thermopotash was too expensive. All this land had been let lapse. It was there for the taking. And he managed for Amazon Mining to stake the entire multi-billion ton resource of this stuff. It's visible from Google Earth. You can see it outcrops. It has this bluish green color. And that became the basis for Verde Potash, which is today known as Verde Agritech. And it wasn't easy because when his stock was sitting there at a dime in late 2008, 2009, and he was pivoting to a fertilizer story that people were wondering, well, this is kind of an oddball story. One of the principals of the brokerage firm, who is now in charge of Rick Rule's Sprott Securities, he wanted to redirect the company into some other direction, and there ended up being a power struggle for control of Verde's cash, and Verde hadn't had any chance to really spend it. So anyways, Chris Veloso ended up winning that battle, ending up in control, going through several cycles with this potash story, and now it's at a stage where they've just filed an updated pre-feasibility study, imagining 3 tracks, 10 million ton per annum, 23 million ton per annum, and 50 million ton per annum. The latter would be more than 50% of Brazil's potash consumption, and the stock has gone to about $10, where it has a half billion dollar valuation. And when you can see the kind of revenues that are capable, and they've used a potash price that is a third of the current potash price as a base case in their updated pre-feasibility study, you can see that this company has substantial upside. And what's interesting is they've believed that the cash flow from these different expansion stages can fund internally each next expansion stage, which is, of course, the holy grail for any mining operation. So rather than having to borrow huge amounts of money or issue equity and dilute existing shareholders, you just build up the scale of your operation as you build the market. And so the company has been talking about, well, we like to become a dividend-paying company when we have surplus cash flow available. And this then creates this problem. Okay, we are a British company. Our operations are in Brazil. It doesn't make sense to export K Forte as a basic potash alternative because it's 6 times the volume. When you add in the fuel transportation and port handling costs, you really can't compete with conventional potassium chloride shipped from places like Canada to the various destinations around the world. They do ship some small, 10-pound bags of super green sand to the retail market in North America, but that has no serious scalability. This is basically a domestic bulk product, and they do want to pay dividends. Brazil does not have a tax treaty with the United Kingdom. They don't have a tax on dividends at the company level right now. Yes, if you are a Brazilian resident and receive dividends, you get taxed on that. But they don't have yet where the company also pays a tax, which ends up being a form of double taxation. But Singapore has a tax treaty with Brazil, and apparently that caps what you can pay at 10%. So they would like to now redomicile the company from the United Kingdom all the way to Singapore, which is English speaking, and that's important because the common sense thing is, well, just redomicile into Brazil. You're a Brazilian company. But apparently that would impact the Toronto listing, that the TSX listing that they currently have, because in Brazil everything is done in Portuguese, not in English, where of course in Singapore is an international center, which is now going to take over from Hong Kong after Xi Jinping decided to wreck it as a unique financial center. But to make such a change, and it will require a 75% yes from votes cast, there needs to be a commercial reason, and the company has cited international sales. And so I'm sort of scratching my head. What is this going to be all about? You know, these super green sand bags, that's interesting, but it's not really international sales. And it turns out that already Verde Agritech is starting to get inquiries from places in Asia, such as India and China, about the product. They're not so much interested in the K Forte bulk product because that's just not going to compete against potassium chloride. But they're very interested in the technology aspect of the company. They filed a patent pending for their BioLevolution product, which involves putting microbes into a water bath and soaking the K-Fort material. And the K-Fort grains have a surface has a 3D texture with lots of nooks and crannies where an awful lot of microbes can hide inside. It can stay damp for 6 months, so they can store this microbe-loaded K Forte material for 6 months, possibly even ship that overseas, though it would make more sense to mix up the microbes and add them after you ship the bulk K Forte. But they also have the BAX product, which involves adding sulfur and various micronutrients such as zinc. And this becomes an information technology story because this becomes a product customized for its particular soil destination, in particular soils that have been depleted in some manner by way too much commercial fertilizer in the past. So it's a bit early for them to be thinking in commercial terms, but by moving into Singapore and setting themselves up as this international company that's well positioned to cater to Asia, they're setting the stage for a future exports of K Forte beyond what can serve the Brazilian potash requirements, and sell it as a premium priced product that's customized for the special needs of these other countries. So this will happen meeting will happen in July sometime. If it's passed, the redomicile will happen quite quickly. They're already doing the legwork for a U.S. listing, either on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange AM, and that could happen also very quickly. So with the company's doing all the steps necessary to become an international company with potential serious international sales down the road, but even more serious domestic sales growing through their expansion strategy.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
We've been speaking with John Kaiser. I'm Jim Goddard. Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.